Britain has long been seen as a land of order and civility. But if you dig into its past, you'll find something much darker. A history soaked in brutality, fear, and some of the most gruesome punishments ever devised. From devices designed to crush bones to punishments so horrifying they'd make modern-day execution methods look tame. Today, we're diving into the terrifying world of Great Britain's most brutal punishments. But as you hear these stories, remember, these weren't just punishments. They were messages meant to instill fear and keep people in line. And in many cases, they were far worse than the crimes themselves. Stick around because some of these are so disturbing, they don't even seem real. The breast ripper. Mutilation at its worst. Women accused of adultery, heresy, or blasphemy faced a fate so brutal it's almost unimaginable. The breast ripper was a metal claw, often heated until red hot, used to tear flesh from the victim's body. The device was designed to mutilate and permanently disfigure, ensuring the accused woman carried the shame and pain of her supposed crimes for life. Some versions of the breast ripper had spiked edges, while others were shaped like pincers to clamp down and shred flesh. The psychological torment was just as severe as the physical pain. In some cases, this was carried out in public, ensuring the victim was not only brutally scarred, but also humiliated. A punishment intended not just to punish, but to serve as a warning to other women. The Iron Maiden, a fictional nightmare. Next up, it's one of history's most infamous torture devices, a terrifying metal coffin lined with spikes, designed to impale victims as it slowly closed shut. But was the Iron Maiden ever actually used? For centuries, it has been a symbol of medieval cruelty, appearing in history books, horror attractions, and even movies. Yet some historians suggest it may never have existed at all. The idea of the Iron Maiden first gained widespread attention in the 18th century, long after the medieval period had ended. No confirmed records of its use exist, and many believe it was an invention designed to exaggerate the brutality of the past. Some claim spiked enclosures may have existed in some form, but the dramatic coffin-like version we know today seems to be more fiction than fact. So, was the Iron Maiden a real medieval torture device, or simply a myth created to shock and terrify? We may never know for sure. The Pear of Anguish, a myth of madness? The Pear of Anguish is said to be one of the most disturbing torture devices in history, a metal contraption inserted into a victim's mouth, throat, or even other body openings, designed to slowly expand and tear tissue apart in unimaginable agony. But did this horrifying tool ever truly exist? Many accounts claim that the Pear of Anguish was used to punish heretics, witches, and adulterers, stretching the body in ways it was never meant to endure. Yet, despite these gruesome tales, there is no solid historical evidence proving it was ever actually used. Like the Iron Maiden, it seems to have surfaced in the 18th or 19th century, a time when medieval horror was being sensationalized for entertainment. Some suspect the Pear of Anguish was a misidentified object, possibly a medical tool or a device created purely for shock value. Was it ever truly used for torture, or was it just another fabricated nightmare? The truth remains uncertain. Chappy chopper, a mysterious execution tool. Unlike the Iron Maiden, this one is much more obscure. The Chappy chopper is believed to have been a crude amputation or execution device, possibly similar to a guillotine or axe. Some sources suggest it was a small, portable tool used for punishing thieves by cutting off fingers or hands. Though little historical documentation exists, what we do know is that amputation was a common punishment for criminals in medieval Britain. Theft and repeat offenses could cost a person their hand or foot, while traitors and murderers faced far worse fates. Could the Chappy chopper have been a widely used tool, or is it simply a name given to a variety of different amputation methods over the years? The lack of clear records makes this one of history's more enigmatic punishments. The breaking wheel, a symphony of pain. The breaking wheel was one of the most brutal execution methods in medieval Europe, and Britain was no exception. Designed to prolong suffering for as long as possible, this punishment ensured a slow, agonizing death. The condemned were tied to a giant wooden wheel, with their limbs stretched out and secured. Executioners would then smash their bones with iron bars, breaking them one by one. Sometimes, they would weave the shattered limbs through the spokes of the wheel, leaving the victim twisted and contorted in their final moments. For some, death came quickly from sheer shock and blood loss. But for others, it was a slow, torturous process. left exposed to the elements, wild animals and crows, with broken bones preventing even the smallest movement. Some were even placed upright on display, their mangled bodies a warning to all who passed by, a punishment so horrific that even hardened executioners feared performing it. Thumb screws, crushing the fingers. The thumb screws may have looked small, but they inflicted unbearable pain. This torture device consisted of a metal vise that slowly crushed the fingers or toes of the victim, shattering the bones and ripping apart the nails. It was often used to force confessions or extract information, with the slow tightening of the device leaving the accused in excruciating agony. Some victims admitted to anything just to make the pain stop, regardless of whether they were guilty or innocent. And once the thumb screws had done their work, the victim was often left permanently disfigured, their hands rendered useless. A deceptively simple device, but one of the most feared tools of torture. The ducking stool, a death sentence in disguise. Witchcraft accusations led to countless women being strapped into the ducking stool, a wooden chair suspended over a body of water. The accused were tied down and repeatedly dunked into freezing water to determine their guilt. If they drowned, they were considered innocent, though they still died. If they survived, they were deemed witches and often executed by hanging or burning at the stake. But it wasn't just for witchcraft. The ducking stool was also used to punish women for gossiping, disobeying their husbands, or speaking out against authority. The slow, torturous process often led to broken bones, severe hypothermia, or fatal drowning. A brutal punishment where death was almost guaranteed, regardless of innocence. The pillory, a public spectacle of shame. Unlike other punishments, the pillory didn't kill its victims, but it often led to permanent injury or even death. Criminals were locked into a wooden frame with their head and hands immobilized, left standing for hours or even days, as the public was encouraged to mock and abuse them. But what started as humiliation often turned into something far worse. Rotten food, stones, and even human waste were hurled at the accused, while some were beaten or whipped while in the pillory. In extreme cases, victims were left so exposed to the elements that they died of exhaustion, heat stroke, or cold. And for the truly unlucky ones, an angry mob could tear them apart before their sentence was over. The cage, a slow death by starvation. For certain criminals, execution wasn't enough. Instead, they were locked in hanging cages, left to starve, freeze, or be eaten by birds, suffering a slow and agonizing death while crowds watched. The cages were placed in high traffic areas, such as town squares, castle walls, or along roads where travelers would pass by, making them an ongoing warning for anyone considering breaking the law. Over time, the victim's flesh would rot, and their skeletons would remain caged until the iron rusted away or the remains were finally removed. The boot, a nightmare for the legs. The boot was a device designed to crush a victim's legs beyond repair. The accused's lower limbs were placed inside a wooden or metal casing, and wedges were hammered in, slowly increasing pressure until bones shattered, muscle tore, and flesh ruptured. In some versions, the boot was heated over a fire, roasting the flesh while the victim was still alive. It was a punishment designed not just to inflict pain, but to permanently cripple those who endured it. The saw, sliced in half. Few execution methods were as gruesome as the saw. Victims were hung upside down, ensuring that blood would flow to their heads, keeping them conscious for as long as possible. The executioner then slowly sawed through their body, usually starting from the groin and working their way down. The process was agonizingly slow, designed to inflict the maximum amount of suffering before death finally came. And for some, death didn't come quickly. Some victims remained alive, feeling every second, until the blade reached their chest, pressing, crushed to death. Also known as peine forte et dure, pressing was used to force confessions. Victims were laid on the ground, a wooden board placed over them, and heavy stones stacked on top. Some were slowly crushed over several days, their ribs snapping under the pressure, while others suffocated within hours. A punishment meant to break not just the body, but the will of the accused. The gibbet, a death that never ended. The gibbet was a public spectacle of death. After execution, the criminal's body was locked in an iron cage and left to rot, hanging from a pole in busy areas where thousands would see. The intention was simple: to strike fear into the hearts of onlookers, ensuring they knew the consequences of crime. Some corpses remained hanging for years, their bones falling apart over time until nothing remained but rusted iron and the echoes of their crimes. hanging, drawing, and quartering, the worst of the worst. Of all the punishments in British history, none were more feared than hanging, drawing, and quartering, the ultimate sentence for high treason. This execution method was specifically designed to be as gruesome and humiliating as possible. The condemned were hanged by the neck, but not to death. They were cut down while still alive, only to face the next, even more horrific step. Next came the drawing, where the victim's stomach was cut open, their intestines pulled out and burned before their eyes. If that wasn't enough, their genitals were removed, ensuring they would never leave a legacy behind. Finally, the quartering. The body was cut into 4 parts, and the severed limbs were sent to different parts of the country to be displayed as a warning to others. Sometimes, the head was placed on a pike, left to rot for all to see. This punishment was reserved for traitors, and those convicted rarely had the mercy of a clean death. It was meant to ensure terror, pain, and disgrace, both in life and in death. Prison hulks, floating hell. With prisons overflowing, criminals were locked in decommissioned ships, known as prison hulks. These floating prisons were filthy, overcrowded, and disease-ridden. Prisoners were left in dark, damp quarters where rats and insects thrived. Malnutrition, disease, and brutality from guards ensured that many died before ever serving their sentence. Transportation to Australia, exile for life. Even stealing a loaf of bread could mean being sent to the other side of the world. The journey to Australia was brutal. Prisoners were packed into ships like cargo, many succumbing to disease before they ever arrived. For those who survived, life in Australia was harsh, unforgiving, and full of labor. Many never returned to Britain, forever cut off from their families, sentenced to exile in a land they would never escape. These punishments show just how brutal Britain's past really was. They weren't just sentences, they were spectacles of suffering, meant to control through terror. But which one shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into history's darkest moments, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications.